Now, Sally is quite a difficult person to introduce because she's simply done so much in her life already that and virtual dinner doesn't taste any better than virtual lunch. You can find on her website an endless list of things she's achieved already, but I would just like to thank her very dearly for talking for us today and pass you on. Sally Kettle.
Oh, hi everybody. Thank you so much for having me. This is actually my second Zoom talk, so please forgive it if it's a little bit clattery, but I'm going to tell you all about my ocean road adventures. And as Ben said, if you want to ask a question at the end, if you've got it burning and you don't want to forget it, then whack it in the chat and we'll go through them then. So yeah, so let me share my screen, and then we can do some pictures as well as the storytelling. And what I was going to say something, I can't remember what it is now, but I'll share the screen and we'll go from there. Right, here we go. Can everybody see that? Okay, can I have a thumbs up? Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so let me start it off. So I have called this particular talk No Hope on the Boat, and I'll explain why it's called that in the talk. But basically it's about ocean rowing, because I'm a two-time Atlantic ocean rower, resilience and the power of pragmatism during uncertain times. And the reason why I've called it the power of pragmatism is because it's one of the biggest lessons I learned from being in an ocean rowing boat. So let me tell you a bit about myself. Like I said, I'm an ocean rower and I've rowed across the Atlantic twice. Oh yes, I remember now what I was going to say. It's going to be about 30 to 40 minutes this, so I'm going to rattle through it to be able to get through all the content, but I hope that's a good enough time for you and won't take up your entire afternoon. So I'm going to tell you about the two ocean rows that I've been on and the lessons I've learned from those. But from those experiences, I actually went on to become a professional adventurer, and I was an adventurer for 15 years, as well as qualifying as a humanitarian aid worker and deploying off to disaster zones as well. So I've had a really very interesting last few years, and weirdly, when I do talks, I'm normally in a situation where my audience have never experienced isolation and now the global audience has completely experienced it, and probably has very much their own tales to tell. But like I said, I've got some lessons that I learned from my ocean rowing experiences, and I've kind of culminated it down to the 5 key points that I thought I'd like to share, that I think I have brought with me to this experience of the pandemic and being isolated. And the first one is unrealistic expectations, and I'll talk through all of these in terms of, you know, why I've come to these conclusions. Number 2 is false horizons. The next one is the power of kindness. I'll explain No Hope on the Boat, and the final one is 2 choices. So they're my 5 key points, and I'll go over them at the end to summarise. So I decided to row across the Atlantic with this man here, and his name's Tomo, and he and I were living together in Brighton. I'd just done a theatre degree there. This was back in 2000, and he and I had a very tempestuous relationship. Neither of us had ever rowed before or been at sea, and I bet you're wondering why somebody like the two of us would decide to row across the Atlantic Ocean together. Yes, maybe, yeah. So I'll tell you what. I just done the London Marathon, and I wanted to do what I thought was the next big thing, which was going to be on the bike going from Land's End to John O'Groats. And I asked Tomo, this chap here, if he wanted to go with me, and he said, no, I am going with my best friend. It's a boys only trip and girls are not allowed. So I threw a strop, and he said, you know what, let's row across the Atlantic instead, which is not something I was imagining, and I'm sure that isn't the first thing that would have cropped up for you. And I don't know where he got it from, but he must have heard it on the news somewhere. But I decided that actually, wouldn't that be an amazing adventure? I was in my mid-20s. I was having what I would call a quarter-life crisis. It's that time in your life when you're desperate for a kind of a rite of passage, perhaps, or to really prove yourself. I'd come out of, like I said, the theatre degree, and yeah, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I had boyfriend that I kind of liked. He was a man who needed to go to Specsavers, or I did, one of the two. And, you know, here we were living in Brighton, kind of deciding what we were going to do for the rest of our lives. So that night in bed, I imagined myself on a tiny wooden rowing boat, coming number 29, your time is up type thing, out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, probably, you know, getting quite fit and then drowning horribly in the waves. But I decided that Tomo wasn't going to win the argument on the ocean rowing thing. So the next day I went onto the internet to find out if people do actually do that, do actually row oceans. And to my horror, if there's something bloody stupid to do, we Brits, we are the first to do it, right? Because there was a chap called Shea Blythe who in 1966 rowed across the Atlantic with his then friend John Ridgway. They were very successful. They haven't spoken to each other since, but Shea Blythe decided to organise ocean rowing races, and then they started in a place called Tenerife. Most of you will know where that is, but it's a small island in the Canaries, and a whole load of Brits pitched up in these tiny wooden rowing boats, and I'll show you a picture of, actually I'm going to show you a picture now. They look like this, right? They come flat pack, so you glue them together yourselves, and they're 23 foot long by 6 foot wide, or for the youngsters 8 meters by 2 meters, and that would be their home for however long it took them to row across the Atlantic Ocean. And all of them got in the boats, all of them thought they were going to die. They all managed to get across alive, some not as friends, but it was very successful. And when I looked on the internet, there was going to be a race in a year and a half's time. But first I thought I needed to be a man, because at that time only men were rowing oceans. Second, I thought I needed to be a rower, because only rowers row oceans. And I, you know, I obviously didn't pass those those tests. And I thought, when I ring them up, they're going to tell me that I'm going to need to get on a treadmill and pass lots of medical examinations. But when I called up the race organisers, they said, as long as you pay the money, you are in the race. And it was £50 to register, or £150 to register, should I say. And I called Tomo and said, do you fancy doing it? And he said, yes. I said, good, you owe me £75. There's a meeting next Saturday. And we'd entered into a race to row 3,000 miles across the Atlantic Ocean. And we had never been at sea. But it was extraordinary. And when we arrived at the very first meeting, I knew it was the sport for me, because when I walked in, it was all men, gorgeous men, gorgeous men. But imagine rugby players, but very tall, right? And only one other woman, and her name was Faye. And there'd only been, I think, 15 women who'd ever attempted any ocean row at that point in the world ever. And we found out what it was going to cost to take part in the race. It was going to cost between £50,000 and £100,000, which is a huge amount of money. We'd have to do astronavigation, first aid at sea, sea survival, pass lots of tests and so on and so forth. But I thought, to be honest with you, it's just like, you know, doing your driving test. If you don't pass the first time, you just keep going until you do. And we were extremely excited, and we came away from that meeting thinking this was going to be something we could absolutely achieve. And we decided that if we were going to row 3,000 miles across the Atlantic, we'd do it for charity. And Tomo has epilepsy. And in this hometown of Halifax, it's in the north of the UK, there was a small charity called the Fund for Epilepsy, and we called them up and said, hey, we're going to row across the Atlantic, we'd love to row for you, is that all right? And they said yes. I said good. We will raise not even £5,000 or £20,000. We told them we were going to raise £1 million. We had a year and a half to raise £1,100,000, and incredibly it worked, because when we went to see people and told them about our adventure, they gave us a tenner because they thought we were going to die. And then when we bought our second-hand rowing boat, this is her, she'd been across before, so she knew the way. We took her around the country to introduce her to people, and they saw that, and they thought that was the coffin in which we were going to die, and they gave us 20 quid, off you go. So by the time we got to the start of the race, we'd raised all the money we needed to get to the start, which was, like I said, between £50,000 and £100,000. I think all in it costs closer to £100,000 than £50,000. It's expensive because you've got to buy the boat, you've got to buy the kit, you've got to get the boat to the start. And we started in a place called La Gomera, which is right next to Tenerife, and that's where ocean rowing races start now. And it's really important to let you know that we stockpiled. We stockpiled like we've all done, right? Well, some of us anyway. On loo roll, we had plenty of loo roll, we needed that. Chocolate, and for some reason, I decided to take 10 ton of chili con carne, dehydrated chili con carne. I think, I don't know why we made that decision, but you take kind of ration packs, you know, the army ration packs, and add the water while you're out there. And I think the chili con carne tasted pretty good on land. But what we didn't know and didn't realise was that when you're at sea, your taste buds change. So the salt water around your mouth changes the way things taste. And funnily enough, I actually really enjoyed chili con carne out at sea. But after 6 weeks of having it twice a day, you know, I haven't touched chili con carne since. But either way, we had lots of it. So when we did our training, it's very interesting because ocean rowers said to us that when you get to La Gomera, don't worry about not having trained a lot at sea before you get there. As long as you last the first 2 weeks, you'll definitely get across. And the advice on navigation was, this is not like any other sport. It's really not a sport at all. It really is for people who are wanting to get out and really challenge themselves, because the advice was go south until the butter melts and turn right. That was your directional advice from the organisers. And when we did get to La Gomera and we had 2 weeks of preparation, when we stepped into the boat, at that point, the only time we'd spent at sea in our wooden rowing boat was half a day in Chichester Harbour, and it had been choppy. And the reason why is because people had said, if you go off the coast of the UK, it's exceptionally dangerous. And I know how dangerous it is because I've tried it. So this is a different race, and this was only a few years ago, I think 4 years ago now. I tried to row around Great Britain with a girl called Charlene from Cardiff, and we started at Tower Bridge, as you can see. And I don't know if you see the really gorgeous barge. I expect many of you know which barge that is, but that's the Gloriana. And we started together, and this is us looking very cool in our bright red rowing boats, and we called ourselves the Coast Girls. Unfortunately, we didn't quite make it round the coast because we were rescued by the RNLI at Margate, which, for those of you who know the geography of the UK, is not actually that far. We literally got out of the Thames estuary, turned right, and got hurtled in the middle of the night into a place called Botany Bay. And we were picked up by the RNLI, and they're the wellies. So actually going around the coast of the UK is far harder than rowing any ocean, which is odd, but true. So here we were in La Gomera, prepping, getting ready, and the day we left felt like the worst day of my life. My dad was crying on the pontoon. It was pretty stressful, and as I said, we hadn't spent a lot of time in our rowing boats. We'd spent a lot of time training. We did all the astronavigation, we did all the courses, but we'd gone definitely with that view of the first 2 weeks, and we got into the rowing boat and we rowed out to the start, had an argument about the foot plates. The hooter went off, and within 20 minutes all the other rowing boats had disappeared, and unfortunately we lasted 6 days, because 4 days in, Tomo had his first epileptic seizure, and we knew it was going to happen. We just didn't realise it was going to happen so quickly. And I've put this very unflattering photograph of myself in it, and the reason why is because it reminds me of how small the rowing boat is, and I'll give you a tour of the rowing boat in a bit. But the cabin is about the size of a 2-man tent. When you sit on it, you hit your head on the ceiling, and I'd handwritten all the names of people who'd given us money to get to the start. Over 1,000 supporters. We had over 150 corporate sponsors. I cut my hair off because when you have a shower at sea in a rowing boat, it is literally a water bottle with some holes in the top that you squeeze over the top of your head. I mean, we'd like to think that isolation is pretty tough, but it's certainly not as tough as having to go out into a garden, wee in a bucket, and squeeze a bottle of water over your head for a shower every day. It was hard work and incredibly stressful, deciding what I was going to do about this situation. And in the end, I decided it was probably best that we go back to the start. But there was no way that boat was not going across. I'd spent with Tomo a year and a half preparing, and it was incredibly important for me that we finished what we started. So I got on the satellite phone and I called the support yachts, and they were 50 miles away, and it took them 24 hours to come that 50 miles. And when they arrived, they threw us a rope and we attached it to the boat, a great big hole in the back of the boat. Woo! We were towed into La Gomera harbour, and we had to put our boat to bed and leave it with a boat builder. As you can see, the tarp on the side of the boat there is where the damage was from the rope attaching to the cleats, and you can see all the sponsors, the corporate sponsors that gave us money, and a very dejected Tomo with all the kit kind of sitting outside. We were going to have to return to the UK with our tails between our legs, and like I said, I left the boat with the boat builder. While I was out there waiting for the support yacht to come and get us, I did call one person who I thought might be able to jump on board with me and save the day. Mum, it's all going wrong. Will you come with me? Mum said yes. I said, good, bring more tea bags. Mum was coming with me, but when we arrived back in La Gomera, my mum was there in a pair of borrowed salopettes, a bag of tea bags. And the organisers looked at my mum, who's a gardener living in Northampton, and said, hey, have you ever rowed before? And she said, no. And they looked at the damage on our boat and they disqualified us from the race. But my mum wanted to do it. And so when we returned back to the UK, I decided, well, you know, what can we do to make this work? And my mum and I received a phone call, a very unexpected phone call from an organisation called the Ocean Rowing Society, who very much support ocean rowers who decide to go solo and not in races. They said, we're having a regatta. It's the first time it's ever happened and it hasn't happened since. And it's going to be in 2 months' time. Would you like to join as the first and only female crew in that particular regatta? And of course we said yes. And this is my mum, Sarah. There she is. It sounds so flippant, doesn't it? This idea of my mum coming with me. It gets worse when I tell you that 6 months before I hadn't spoken to her for nearly 10 years. I left home at 16 and was very pleased to go. My mum had her first child at 16. She had 3 before she was 20. She's a redhead. I don't know if that says a lot, but it certainly said a lot to me. Where I thought we were very different. But here we were. I'd moved back in with my mum and dad. After the first attempt, Tomo went off to his mum in Halifax for some TLC and lemon drizzle cake, and my mum had agreed to come with me. In fact, 6 months before, when I told her that I was going to do it, because I had to really, you know, it's not, I couldn't sneak off. I still had an amazing relationship with my dad. I told her that we were rowing the Atlantic while she was driving the car, so she wouldn't hit me. And she said, don't be so stupid. Tomo has epilepsy. You're too skinny. You'll never get across. But my mum likes camping, and ocean rowing is just like camping, except instead of hills and cows, it's waves and whales. And she got excited about the idea of me being out in the boat and kept giving advice about how to use pegs and what to do while we're out there and saving and storing stuff. And I suddenly realised in my mid to late 20s that if I wanted a relationship with my mother, I had to take a big step towards her. And so I asked her at that time, if things go wrong, Mum, will you come with me? And she said yes. Completely changed our lives. She didn't realise that 6 months later she'd be getting a phone call from the rowing boat saying, Mum, will you come with me? And now she had 2.5 months to train to row 3,000 miles. So she went to the local river in Northamptonshire. It's called the River Nen, and she rowed in a little yellow bucket of a boat. She hit the bank and all the swans. She did an astronavigation course. She said it was the most complicated math she'd done in 40 years. She did a sea survival and all the courses that we'd done, and we arrived back in La Gomera again 2 months later. And this is my mum's first trip out, and it was 3 days before we left. And this is our rowing boat. So you can see at the back here, you've got solar panels that run all the electrical equipment. So your water maker, which is a reverse osmosis water maker, so it sucks up water from the sea and puts it through a fine filter. Your sat phone, your GPS, all the other kits that needs any power is run by those, and they charge at 2 car batteries for anybody's interested. Also down the deck you can see you're open to the elements, so if it's raining you get wet. And all inside, all the kind of the bottom of the boat, there's emergency ballast water, which is your fresh water just in case your water maker breaks, and also you store all your packet food in there. And at the front is where you keep all your gubbins, so your toolkit, your axe, just in case you need to kill your mother. But the axe actually is just in case you go over and you have to break your way out of the bottom of your boat. But anybody who remembers weebles, quite a few the youngsters here will not know what I'm talking about, but a weeble was a little toy which had a very weighted bottom that if you tipped it, weebles wobble but they don't fall down. And this was the principle here, is that we had the emergency ballast water, fresh water, that if you spun over it would self-right. So this was going to be our home for as long as it took to get there. And the day we left, I felt the weight of responsibility, the burden of responsibility on my shoulders, because before I was going with my boyfriend and now I was taking my mum and it was really scary. And my dad had been given strict instructions not to cry, so he wore sunglasses, and I was weeping. It was just awful. And we rode out to the start, and my mum said, in the last race, Sally, Faye, she looks so good, let's look good, get across the horizon and have a cup of tea. That was our plan. And then she said, you know what, in the last race the Kiwis, they stood up on their boat and they did a haka. If the Kiwis can do the haka, then the Kettles can do the yoga. You can imagine my horror. I don't know what it is about being a parent, and I am one, but being a parent, that means that you have absolute permission to embarrass your daughters in front of as many people as possible as we stood doing synchronized yoga poses on our boat. I'd gone from being a complete wreck to laughing my head off, and I suddenly realized that maybe my mum knew me better than I thought she did. The hooter went off. We zoomed 2.5 knots, walking pace, across the horizon. We had our cup of tea, and then we were seasick for an entire month. It is the best diet I have ever been on. We lost 2.5 stone. And people often ask us, you know, what did you eat in that time? Well, we didn't eat the packet food because it just made us feel so sick. We lived on rice cakes and Rice Krispies. And I don't know if you've tried eating Rice Krispies on a windy day, but they go everywhere. So here we are. If you want to row across quickly, you've got to be rowing 24 hours a day. And our initial plan was to do 2 hours on, 2 hours off during the night, and then 4 hours on, 4 hours off during the day. 2 hours, 2 hours off, 2 hours on, 2 hours off during the day, 4 hours on, 4 hours off during the night. And I don't know if you tried walking towards your bedroom door and back again for 4 hours in the dark. And it doesn't matter how beautiful the stars are. And I have to tell you, you will never see stars like you see stars at sea. You can see all the constellations, and it's even better in a rowing boat because there's nothing in your way. I've been out on a yacht. I did the Clip Around the World yacht race, and when you look up, all you see is bloody mast, mast and sail. On a rowing boat, you see sky. In fact, people ask us, what's it like to be at sea? And I say, it's what it's like to be at sky. So you have all the constellations in all their glory. You see the moon in all its phases, from a slither to a full coin, and it's like you're rowing on a dark day to no moon at all, and it's like you're rowing in space. You see the stars reflecting in the ocean around you. You can hear the whales singing around your boat, and there's phosphorescence trickling off your oars. It's just glorious. But at 3 o'clock in the morning, you don't care. You want to be in your bed. And that's what we did. We went to bed. In fact, sometimes we drifted further during the night than we rowed during the day. It made no sense whatsoever. We were very slow. 2.5 knots was our average speed, as I mentioned. We could have walked across the Atlantic Ocean quicker, but it did mean that we got to see a lot of wildlife, and this was one of our visitors. And I think one of the things that's going to come out of the pandemic is our reconnection with our environment, right? How many people have heard the birds singing? Probably for some people, really for the very first time, you know, really concentrated on hearing them, seeing them in our gardens. They're so incredibly loud, but in the city, they're actually not as loud as they normally are, but they seem it to us. So this little guy here, he arrived in the middle of the night. He's a brown noddy, we know he is because we looked him up in the book, and he was walking across our solar panels, bop, 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 and the boat was tipping, and he was slipping down, and yeah. And my mum said, go and have a look. So I opened the door, and there he was, bop, 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 bop. He became ship's bird, and eventually he sat on my foot. He sat on my mum's head. And then eventually he sat on our seat, and he stayed there practically the entire way across the ocean. And, you know, who gets to do this? We do, because we're going so slowly. But we had visits from whales who came to see us. There was 5 whales and a calf as well. We tried to touch them. We got covered in whale snot. You know, it was pretty gross. They were there for half an hour, and then one of them caught one of the fish they were trying to roust out from underneath our boat. My mum had said at the time, I can't believe we can actually hear them singing. She thought we needed special sonar equipment. We got to do that because we slowed down to the pace of a moving whale. Again, it's one of those things that I think that I'm going to take from this particular moment, is that suddenly it forces you to completely slow down and just to stop and smell the roses. And that's exactly what we did on this trip. We did that. And people often ask us, were we scared and frightened? We very rarely were. We had one really bad storm. It lasted 3 days, and my mum said it was like being on the set of a Morecambe and Wise show, because every time we tried to step out of the cabin to go for a wee, there was a chap in the wings with a bucket of water ready to throw over us. It was so uncomfortable. And one of the worst things about rowing is not rowing, because if you're not rowing, you're not moving. And that is one of the most demoralizing things about that situation. We had flying fish. In fact, the tale behind this one is that we were heading in the wrong direction. We were heading towards Florida. We were supposed to be going to Barbados. I was whinging all the time, and I was saying things like, oh, I hope the wind gets better. I hope the waves get better. And my mum said, stop hoping all the time. Remember I told you about the no hope on the boat? This is it, right? This is the thing I learned. She said, when we hope, we're expecting somebody or something to intervene. We are not seeing the world as it is, it's how we want it to be. And this is what she taught me, no hope on the boat. And we had this phrase, and it sounds so demoralizing, and lots of people have difficulty with it, and I completely appreciate that, but it totally works for me. It's having a pragmatic view of what the situation is right now, not how we want it to be. And so we were drifting in the wrong direction. So we put out what's called a parachute anchor, which is a big parachute on a long line of rope, and we sat it out. And we just waited. In fact, my mum hit me around the face with it with this wet flying fish, and she said, "Stop hoping all the time." And we had about 100 wet, flying fish arrive in the middle of the night one morning. We woke up to 90 dead flying fish on our boat, from a tiny little sprat to something that big. And I'd never realised that flying fish flew. I thought they kind of flopped, but they don't. They flew over the waves. So yeah, we waited it out, and of course the weather changed. We pulled in our parachute anchor and we zoomed 2.5 knots towards Barbados. The reason why it took us a long time to get across the Atlantic Ocean, I'm going to tell you how long it took us. It took us 4 months to get across, 106 days in that wooden rowboat. Is that Laura? I saw your eyes just go, what? What? Yeah, yeah, 4 months, right? Imagine looking back now at how long we've been in lockdown. Now imagine yourself in the bathroom with one of your parents or a close friend. And you know, that is the space that you would have lived in for that entire time. It's pretty hardcore. And I was going to tell you about the value of kindness, and my mum taught me on this rowing boat about the value of kindness. She always made my bed before I got in it. She always made my tea exactly when I wanted it, my hot chocolate exactly how I liked it, and did it before I even asked. She was there ready to kind of give. She was giving me kindness all the time. And that's something I've tried to take in every adventure that I've participated in, and it's not always been returned and reciprocated. When things get dark, dangerous, difficult, when you're in pain, when you're sore, when you're grumpy, when things aren't going your way, we very much go into a very selfish mode and become less kind. And my mum taught me that kindness was actually what was needed in those situations. And I always try to remember that. So one of the reasons why it took us so long is because we faced weather like this. It was just glorious, these flat calms, but it's like rowing through treacle. So we need wind up your bum, you need it to be pushed along. And it's so funny because kind of, you know, when you're having a bad time and it's too windy and hideous, it's a beautiful metaphor for life. It's like, it's too much going on. You're desperate for the flat calm, but when you have flat calm for too long, you become bored and you need change, difference. And that's another thing that we learned from this situation, is that it's very nice to be in this, but you need to keep moving. And when you can't keep moving, you need something to change. And the good thing about being at sea is you know that it will change. It always did. And we kept on rowing. Remember I was saying unrealistic expectations. We thought we were going to come in less than 90 days. We came in 106 days. That's how it was. There was nothing we could do about that. We just had to accept. And in terms of false horizons, every time we went out, we thought, oh, crikey, you know, it's going to be 2 more weeks, only 2 more weeks. And of course it's not. It's going to be more or less. We set ourselves these expectations and expect to fulfill them, and often they lead to disappointment. I remember when Boris Johnson, right from the get-go, said it's going to be 12 weeks, we'll be done in 12 weeks. I'm sure those who were facing the World War, the Second World War, felt the exact same disappointment when they were all told it would be done by Christmas. We have to accept, I felt that I have to accept the situation as it is. No hope on the boat. But of course, we got to Barbados because we kept on rowing. And this is us. We got there, right? We rowed into the harbour, and who says women can't park? We brought our boat up beautifully to the pontoon. And I actually heard a man say, oh, they've kept it nice and clean. And we almost hit that enormous super yacht in the back there, And yeah, we stepped off our boat. And I remember thinking, every single day I'd wished my trip away. Every single day I didn't want to be there. Every day I didn't want to fail, but I wanted it to finish. And yet when we got to the end, I didn't want it to stop. I suddenly realised the value of being at sea, how simple that life was, how special it was to spend it with my mum. You know, this person who I had a very, very difficult relationship with. We never talked about that. We accepted how it was then and enjoyed our time together. We listened to music. We cried often. We talked about food. God, we talk about food. All the time we talked about food. And so when we stepped off the boat, that was the end of our journey. And, you know, I suspect that at the end of this period as well, people will be feeling that they really want to get out of the situation. And as soon as it finishes and we're back to normal, they'll be looking back and thinking, crikey, I wish I'd spent more time thinking about, you know, enjoying that. And we came back to the UK to 15 Minutes of Fame. We went on Ready, Steady, Cook. I was a green pepper, Mum was a red tomato, and we cooked rice, not chili con carne, and my mum won, and she won £150 and she spent it on an ottoman, over the pragmatist, right? So yeah, it was extraordinary. We went on BBC Breakfast, and it was really cool, and we'd raised £268,000 for the Fund for Epilepsy. So not quite the million, but £250,000 is still an amazing amount. And one of the last things I did was with Tomo was go and shake the hand of the Doctor of Epileptology at King's College University. We'd funded him through our fundraising, and then I dumped him. I knew it was not going to work, and I returned back to Northampton and stayed with my parents and started a job at BBC Radio Northampton. But to be honest with you, I knew I wasn't done. You know, Mum and I had done this extraordinary adventure. It was life-changing in every way. It had taken us forever to do it, but I wanted a world record. I wanted to be a big fish in a big pond. So I organised a team called Row Girls, and it was going to be, if you can imagine, the first one was going to go in a Land Rover. The boat was a Land Rover. The second one, we were going to go in a Lamborghini, and we pinkificated the hell out of it, all right? This was back in the time where pink was okay, right? It's not so much now, but it was then. And so I got together a team of crack women, and we called ourselves, like I said, the Row Girls, and our boat was lip gloss pink. And we were raising money this time for a charity called Shelter Box, who do big green boxes full of camping kit for people who've lost everything in disasters. I remember I told you it was a humanitarian thing that I did later on after this. It was for them that I qualified. So here we are, the team. I'm at the front, been there, done that. Jo is next to me on my, I suppose on your left-hand side on the screen, and she rowed for university. Strong as an ox, really good at organising stuff. Sue is at the back. She is a corporate girl. She brought us in loads of money to get us to the start of the race. And then there was lovely Claire, smiley, happy, motivating Claire. And you need one of them in the team. And she's gorgeous too. Don't you just hate that? So that was our crew, right? And we had a year and a half to prepare. And the organiser had told us we were going to be the only female four in the race. And if we got across, we would just get a world record. We'd be the first female four ever to row across the Atlantic. So you can imagine our horror when we turned up in La Gomera and there was another women's team, and they were from Guernsey, and we renamed them, well, they called themselves Mission Atlantic. So we renamed them the Guernsey Milkers because they were our competition. They were the only team we wanted to beat. And any of you who've seen the documentary with Ben Fogle and James Cracknell, it was that same race. And they cried a lot, and for good reason. It was going to be the worst weather in the Atlantic in that area for nearly 200 years. I told the girls it was going to be great. We'd see wildlife, flying fish, it would be perfect. Instead, we were going to hit the tail end of a tropical storm and a hurricane. And they were imagining beautiful flat calms. What we actually got was this. When we started the race, we shot off. We were the fastest women's crew for the first week and 2 weeks. In fact, the Guernsey Milkers were 100 miles behind us, and their skipper, Kathy, was very, very seasick, and we were kind of hoping she was going to die. In a kind of like competitive sort of way. But we were doing incredibly well. And then, like I said, the storms rolled in, and we were facing 40 to 50 foot waves, 50 to 60 knot winds. And Jo, strong as an ox, Jo slipped and hurt her back, and she stopped rowing and started whinging. And the last thing you need when you're in a small boat, with a small team, is a whinger. And it didn't matter what we said to try and support her and help her. She decided that enough was enough. She was going to get off the boat, and in doing so, she would disqualify us from the race. But we called the support yacht, and they came to come and get her, and that's why we've got this incredible photograph. And you'll never guess what she did when they arrived. She got on the VHF and said, "No, I am staying on the boat. It's okay. I can still do this." And we were like, "Oh, Jo, thank you so much. That's incredible." I didn't want us to be disqualified. The only reason I wanted to be there was to get a world record, to get across as the fastest women's team, and we were doing so well. So you can imagine my horror when the support yacht went over the horizon, and guess what she did? She changed her mind. She said, "I want to get off." And we had to allow her to do that. In fact, it was a massive lesson for me in that, if somebody doesn't want to be there anymore and they're incredibly upset and unwilling, it's really best for their mental health that they do go, and for yours too. But the support yacht said, "We can't come and get you." Out of the 26 boats taking part that year, 16 had capsized and 9 hadn't self-righted. They were the old style boats, just like my mum's, actually, my mum and I's. 2 girls from America were on their upturned hull for 16 hours waiting to be rescued, and they were picked up by a tall ship. We'd have to wait it out. So that's exactly what we did. We waited it out. And in the time that it took for them to come back, a huge wave hit the back of the boat and sheared the rudder off the back of the boat. And without a rudder coming down the face of a wave like this, it's incredibly dangerous. We called the support yacht, and they said, "What you need to do is you need to put a line off the back of the boat, line of rope with t-shirts and the water bottle to help stabilise you in the water." So that's what we did. It came to Christmas Day morning, the weather had cleared up. It was a beautiful day, and I was sat out with Claire on deck, and Claire was weeping. She said, "This is the worst Christmas day ever." And then Sue stepped out on board dressed like this. And Ben, you were worried about the nudity? She covered up, but only just. She stepped out on board. By the way, Ocean Rose mostly row naked, and we kind of did. We were friends, and it didn't matter. But she dressed in a pirate's flag, and she took over the boat. And she said, "Where I be taking over this boat? And if you don't be thinking which Christmas carol I've got in my head, then you can't answer the satellite phone." And the phone is ringing, and we know it's our parents. So we're guessing, is it, oh, We Three Kings? No, is it Jingle Bells? She says, yes, it is. And we're on the phone to Mum and Dad, and we're saying to them, "It's the best Christmas day ever." And it was. It was the best Christmas day ever. The weather was different. It was beautiful. It was warm. We weren't wet all the time. We had champagne. We opened presents. I got some Christmas socks. Claire got some Christmas pants. And we stopped rowing. We swam in the ocean 7 miles deep. And it was glorious. But it didn't change the fact that Joe was getting off the boat. So the next morning we kept on rowing, but at that point several boats had gone past us. Pairs boats had gone past us, so people rowing in twos. Solar rows had gone past us, and the girls were catching up. The support yacht came back to get Joe, and I teased her saying they're going to send a helicopter and drop a man and scoop you up. No, they sent a rubber dinghy. So if you can imagine that there's 1,000 miles in one direction and 2,000 miles in the other, so 2,000 miles behind us with 1,000 miles to go, and you can see how windy it is. They sent 2 crew members in a rubber dinghy in an ocean 7 miles deep. The bravery of that crew is unbelievable, and the skipper was extraordinary. They sent over a giant cheese, because I called up and said, "Oh gosh, if you've got a cheese sandwich, I love a cheese sandwich." It's the small things, the little things that make the difference. They came over with a giant plate-sized cheese, and off went Joe, on came the cheese, and in that moment, we were disqualified from the race. We got into the cabin that night, and I knew as soon as Joe had stepped on that yacht, she would regret it for the rest of her life. We ate the cheese and we went to bed. We kept on rowing, and a few days later, I had a phone call from my now husband, who was also rowing in the same race as us. He'd won, he was in Antigua, which is where we were heading, and saying, "Hey, how you getting on?" I said, "Yeah, right, yeah, fine, we're still here." And then the boat moved weirdly, it lurched, and I said, "I'll phone you back." I opened the door. Sue's out on deck, Claire's in the cabin with me, and Sue's face is ashen. She said, "I think I've hit something in the water." She'd hit a shark that was now attacking the back of the boat. She was screaming, there was a lot of crying. We got her into the cabin, we closed the door, because we thought if we hide in the cabin, if the shark doesn't see us, the shark won't eat us. That's the plan. The girls are saying, phone the support yacht, they're already in Antigua. I didn't think they could do much, but I rang them up and they said, "Oh, the shark's just nudging you to say hello." No, he's not, right? We've been attacked by a shark in the middle Atlantic Ocean, and of course, we had to do something about it. I knew he was probably eating that rope I was telling you about, the makeshift rudder system. So as the skipper, I nominated Sue to go out on deck, grab a knife and cut the rope. So that's what she did. She stepped out, she cut the knives, she cut the rope with the knife, and it all went quiet. We have never rowed so fast in all our lives. And everybody asked us, what type of shark was it? That was the shark. And the reason why I put that shark up there is because there was no way I was going to go out and look at its dorsal fin. Either way, it made off with all our t-shirts and our water bottle and the entire makeshift rudder system off the back of our boat. We were again without a rudder, and we were slowing down to 2.5 knots. We were averaging at the very start 5 knots. Eventually we were crawling at 1.5 knots. And of course the Guernsey milkers shot straight past us. We kept on rowing. We tacked. So what we did is we threw a drogue over one side and rowed that way. And then we threw the drogue over the other side and rowed that way. So we zigzagged into Antigua. We had 1,000 miles of doing that, and there we are pointing at it. And we called our dads and say, book the flights. We're coming in on Valentine's Day. And Dad's decided that they thought that we would come in 2 days later, so that's what they did. They booked their flights for 2 days later. We were the only ocean rowing boat in history to try and stay out in the Atlantic longer than everybody else, because the last thing you want to do is go into the harbour, get off the boat and go and meet your parents at the airport. So we sat out on that parachute anchor, remember I told you about that, and we waited. But we did the maths. We were 25 miles away from Antigua. They were coming in more than 24 hours, and we were going at 2.5 knots on our parachute anchor on the current. We were always going to drift into Antigua, English harbour, faster than they were ever going to arrive. So we pulled in our parachute anchor and we rowed across the line, which is an invisible line off South Point of Antigua. We hadn't had a rudder for over 1,000 miles, and we rowed into English harbour to a whole load of strangers. And I was cross. I was so cross. Mum and Dad had caught an earlier flight. They ran down to the harbour and said, "Have we missed them?" I said, "Yes, you nearly did," and blamed Dad. I was really angry. I was so angry. And I was angry because I had false expectations, high hopes that we were going to get across as the fastest women's sport to get a world record. The fact is, nobody got a world record that year, and it was a miracle that nobody died, right? It was just not going to happen. And the fact that we survived it was actually record enough, right? And I asked the girls, I asked Claire, the first girl on your left, "What did you want to achieve from this?" She said, "I wanted to row across the Atlantic." I asked Sue, "What did you want to do?" She said, "I just wanted to row across the Atlantic." And I eventually got around to talking to Jo and said, "What did you want to do?" She said, "I want to row across the Atlantic." And that's what she did. She got back into a boat the next year, and she went in a boat called Unfinished Business. And she rowed across in the fastest time for a women's four and got a world record. And she went with the two girls from Upturned Hull and another woman who was also hulled by a shark in the same race as us. And when they got to Antigua, they renamed their boat Finished Business. And I was thinking, these sort of situations, it's not what you do, it's what you inspire other people to do. It was a hard lesson to learn, but I had to forgive Jo, and she just didn't want to be there. And eventually I understood what it was like to be in that situation, because when I sailed in that clip around the World Yacht Race, I got all the way across the Atlantic, and then I broke my thumb on the back end of the Isle of Wight. And we were supposed to be sailing into Hull, and I suddenly become a spare part on the boat. I actually said to the skipper, "Just pull up to Dover, I'll swim to shore. I don't want to be here anymore." I suddenly realised what it was like to be an injured person in the crew. And I suddenly realised what it was like to be Jo. And I should have offered her that kindness, and I didn't. But I did offer her that kindness when she decided to do it again, and gave her all my support, and I'm so proud that she did it. And anyway, quite frankly, it's too exciting, because I found out when we got back that my mum and I got a world record as the first mother and daughter to row in the ocean. And because it's the first, it can't be beaten. So there we are. I got my world record in the end. But it was the lessons learned that were more important to me rather than the record itself. So going back to what I was saying at the beginning about unrealistic expectations, I had so many, and I still do, and I try not to. We want to break records, we want to do more, be more, learn that language, finish that jigsaw, redecorate the whole house. But actually sometimes life doesn't allow you to do that, and that's okay. And false horizons, this hope that things will finish quicker than they do, and how demoralizing that can be. Again, that no hope on the boat, it's that pragmatism, it's realizing that life will be as it will be, not how you expect it or want it to be. And kindness, the value of it. And finally, the two choices that I've made in everything that I've ever tried to do, and that is to keep rowing or give up. And it's okay to stop. It's okay to stop, but I've never given up. I really hope you've enjoyed my talk today, and that it's been as fun as it's been to tell it. Thank you so much for listening, and I will now come out of the share and hope you've got some questions for me. Is that okay? Cool? Thumbs up? Perfect. Thank you for listening. Yay! Woo, 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 woo. Cool. Right, are we unmuting?
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yep.
Cool. Was that all right, everybody?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Good.
Oh,
Oh,
Right.
good. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Commute.
Very inspiring. Have you, Sally, are you going to write a book about it?
Well, now voila! The book is written. The book is written, and you can get one from my website. My publisher went bust a few years ago, unfortunately, but I got hold of all the copies. So if you'd like one, I'm happy to sign it for you. And I made the knickers on the front. You see, when you're an Ocean Row, you've got to be able to do some sewing. So, so yeah, I did, and it has both rows and lots of pictures in it too. So
I enjoy it very, because I have a daughter as well. I was hoping to she play some tennis with me during the lockdown. She's very busy. She just went back to work now, but she said yeah, she will join me. It's just very good mother and daughter do something together, isn't it?
Yeah. Actually, it's really important. I think the one thing I definitely learned from that experience is that you've got to allow time for your parent to become a friend.
Yes.
And sometimes that means going away from them and returning.
Yes.
And my stepson is going through that very same thing at the moment with his own mother. He's going to take some time out. They're not having the best relationship, but I really do hope that they come back together again when he's.
Do you have children yourself?
I have a 3-year-old daughter called Floss,
Oh,
who's very spirited. You can read into that what you will.
we will take her to do some rowing in future, I think.
Yeah, I would love to. I would absolutely love to. It depends. You might not want to. That's the thing. You kind of got to let them be who they are. Who's Celia, by the way? Where's Celia? Oh, hi, Celia. I saw you've done loads of
questions.
Yeah, a few questions. Shall I go through them? Is that all right? And they'll probably be quite interesting for everybody else. I think you can all read them in the chat there. It says, how long did it take you to fundraise, and how much did your own savings did you put into it? Okay, so that's an interesting question and a big life lesson. And that is, I decided from the very get-go that I would see this as a business, not a hobby or a holiday. And so if I was going to raise money, I would need to work my hardest to get all the money that I needed to do it. And that's exactly what we did, because I've met other crews where they have literally put their house on the line. And you just don't know how it's going to work out. And they've come back to enormous debt and great anxiety with their families. So if you've got the time, you have to put the time in to raise the money, and that's exactly what we did. And in fact, we raised the $250,000 on the first one, but unfortunately, it all financially turned into a bit of a mess for me, because I'd put somebody in my flat to pay my rent while I was away, and he didn't pay it. And I spiraled into debt and ended up signing on the dole, which was not what I wanted at all. And the charity didn't support me, which was a big life lesson. Again, another one. And very disappointing. I was really saddened by that. And so in the second race, I said to the girls, we have a duty of care to those participating, and we should all get through this not out of pocket. And that's what we did, and we still managed to raise £30,000 for Shelter Box. And my promise to them was to qualify, and that's what I did and deployed with them. So, it's hard, and it takes easily the 1.5 years to do it. So that was that question. Okay, during the trip, did you sleep covered by a top or something similar? So I was inside the cabin, and it's made of wood. I don't know if you saw on the picture of the boat, the cabiny section. Yeah, so you sleep in there. Did you stay in contact with the outside world? Yes, we did. Right, so yeah, we did. And I have to tell you that if my mum had the choice, she would have thrown the satellite phone overboard, because she absolutely hated it, because people were constantly ringing us. We were there in the great outdoors, facing life alone, isolating, ring, ring, how you doing? And I was desperate to speak to people all the time. I really needed that outlet. But my mum wanted to be isolated. And it's amazing how many backseat drivers there are, kind of telling you what you should and shouldn't be doing when you're out there. So that was kind of an interesting one. In terms of WhatsApp and tools like that, so I did it in 2003, into 2004, then 2005 into 2006. Phones were not the same as they are now, and signals were not the same as they are now. So a satellite phone costs £1 a minute, and it's not as reliable as you'd like it to be. So we ended up just trying to bring it down to 1 or 2 calls every Sunday, and that was it. Unless it was the media who would phone us up at 3 o'clock in the morning. And my mum was always very surprised how I would suddenly leap up and go, hello, how are you? Yes, I'm really excited. Because they don't want to hear misery on the end of the line. They want to, you know, hear that you're having a good time. And I pretended a lot. So how did you collect water? Well, we used the water maker. And the water maker sucks the water out of the ocean and desalinates it. But on the second race, the water maker broke. And on one of the, just for brevity of the story, I took out another visit from the support yacht, who actually came and gave us a replenishment of water. So actually, even though Joe got off and disqualified us, we would have had race penalty points or even disqualification anyway, even if she'd stayed, because of the water maker damage. Because it was just so wet all the time, and all our hatches were flooded, and we lost a lot of food, and we needed replenishing with that as well. Did you fish? We didn't fish. We named our fish. So don't name your fish, because if you name them, you don't want to eat them, right? And we also had so much food on the first trip. We had so much food that we actually ended up ripping open some of the packets and throwing it overboard, because we were having to row it. And if that's a ton's worth of boat, and you're going at 2.5 knots, you would do anything to lighten the load. So you ended up throwing quite a bit away. Did you see other ships? Yes, we did. Has anybody experienced the kind of like the sense of kind of disappointment when you have, when you've been in lockdown, when you suddenly see a friend or you meet somebody you haven't seen for a long time and then they go, and that sense of almost gutting, you know, oh, you know, you suddenly realise your loneliness in that space. That happened to us a lot. So we'd have a yacht come over, we'd invite them to see us, we'd have a conversation about how long it was going to take, and I'd be so excited about seeing them. But as soon as they go over the horizon, the loneliness is just so dark after that point that in many ways I wish I hadn't seen them at all. So yeah, we did see yachts. Oh, by the way, in terms of communicating with them, we shouted, "How far have you got? Where are you going?" But usually it was the VHF first, and then if they got closer, then we talked to them. Did you jump into the sea? Yes, we did, and it was very dangerous. And it was unadvisable on the first trip because we had so many siphonophores, not jellyfish, I found out, but Portuguese man of war. And there were millions of them on the first race. On the second one, we just didn't get in the water because it was so wet. And when we damaged the hull, we didn't go out, and we weren't able to fix it because it was so stormy and hideous. But we did go out on Christmas Day because it was so flat and lovely. And it was nerve-wracking. And I think Sue will never get into the ocean again after the shark attack. And what did we listen to? Books and music-wise. So I took an iPod. For Mum and I, we had a mini disc player, if anybody remembers those. Gosh, it sounds so old-fashioned, a mini disc player. And we listened to Carole King out on deck. And it was joyful. Music and books were your moment to have joy. And the mistake I made on the first one is I only took one book and I read it from cover to cover, including all the inside kind of notes, text from the publishers 4 times. And again, that was a weird lesson, because how many times do we rush through the first section of a book just to get to the really fun bits, you know, the saucy bits, and to be able to read it so many times really gave me, you know, a different experience. And on the second one, I took a Harry Potter book, and Claire said, "Oh, by the way, Dumbledore dies." And I went, "Oh, what?" It was just anybody who watches or listens to or reads Harry Potter she almost went overboard. It was almost end of days for Claire. So yeah, that's what we did. So Ben, what do you imagine the birds were thinking since humans seemingly disappeared overnight? How do you mean? Go ask me that.
Ah, well, you became friends with a bird on the boat, and it just
Yeah.
made me think that when we all went into lockdown and have been staying inside our house, the birds must be wondering what's going on. What from your friend the bird? What do you think?
Yes, they were probably thinking, "Oh, for God, for that." I'm knowing from going down on the river, because I live in Kingston, so I'm right next to the River Thames, seeing how many ducks and swans and coots and birds were just enjoying the space and the tranquility. You know, they were sitting in the middle of the room. Most of the time they stick to the far edges. It must have had such, it must feel such a relief for them. I've got a wren nesting in my garden. You know, and I live in Kingston in a little tiny suburban house, and you know, that's never happened before. So what do I do now? I do speaking, so I'm an inspirational speaker. I've done that for 10 years. So I've really enjoyed this process. It's really weird, kind of, because when you're in a group, I've done lots of luncheon clubs. When you're in a group, you kind of pick out a few faces, but now I'm staring at all of you. And that's interesting. And not having the feedback from the audience is very interesting. So I do that. But I work for a team called the National Institutes for Stress, Anxiety and Depression, and they're based in Sweden. And I support them with work around stress, anxiety and depression. But I'm also setting up a charity called the Active Pregnancy Foundation. It took me 10 years to conceive my daughter. And when I did, I'm an active woman and I had no support when I wanted to stay active when I was pregnant, and I found it was such a disgrace. And I'd even qualified as a personal trainer before then and worked at the Olympic Games training the athletes, and suddenly, you know, here I am going to my local gym and them telling me to leave a yoga class. It was just disgrace. So that has to change, and I'm burning bras and banging drums to make that happen. So there you go. Anything? And oh, we have a Swedish viewer today. Who's that? Hello, oh yes, of course, yes, Greta. Hi, Greta. Hello. Yes, we love the Swedes. Will people need your work more because of lockdown? God, yes, please, I hope so. I hope so. You know, I hope so. This is totally the wrong word. Again, I'm kind of using it, you know, yes, I hope so. Yeah, it's an interesting situation. I think what the feedback that I've had from the talks that I've given is that it's actually quite nice to talk about mental health, to be open about the mental health of this situation, and that has only recently changed. I'd say that in the 15 years, almost 15 years of giving talks, last year felt like a tipping point for me. I did a talk at a wellbeing conference, and that probably was one of the first wellbeing kind of conferences, you know, with a big audience that I'd ever heard of. And that afternoon, I would have to step off the stage, get on the train back to my parents, and take my dog to the vets to be put down. And it was I found it extraordinarily difficult to keep it together on the stage. And I wept at the end of my talk, and I was honest with my audience about the situation. And so many people embraced me for that. And that is a step change. I suspect that before that, there would have been no opportunity for me to be quite as open about my emotions in public as I would have been then. And I think that is hugely important. We 70-year-old plus are mad as hell being treated as not real people, much as you did as an active pregnant woman. I bet you are. Who said that? Sheila. Where are you, Sheila? Where? Oh, there you are. I can see you waving. Tell me more. Tell me. Why do you feel that way? I think you're unmuted. I think you can talk. Can we hear you? Oh, we can hear you. Does anybody else share her view? Yes, I hear. I see. Yeah. It's a fascinating time and a massive challenge. I think, you know, it's unprecedented. And one of the things that we're working on with the NISAD team is a program called Certain About Uncertainty, to enable people to cope with the uncertainty of times. Would you like to tell us about the charities you were involved with? Oh, sorry, you sent that to me privately. I just totally read it out. Yeah. So I work with the Girl Guides. So I'm an ambassador for Girl Guiding, and when I was Girl Guides, it was interesting because we spent a lot of time sewing and carving things out of soap. Was anybody else a Girl Guide? Anybody else in guiding at all? Any of the ladies? Yeah, oh, one wave, yeah. So we weren't particularly adventurous when I was a guide, and I always wanted to be a scout. Don't tell them that. But the scouts had way more fun. And that's completely changed now in guiding. And I just kind of wanted to, you know, I was really keen to get out and tell the girls that, you know, I used to be a brownie and a guide, and I took on these adventures, and it's okay to do them, and, you know, we can have just as much adventurous fun as the boys do. So I do that, and I'm also a trustee for a charity called the London Sports Trust, and they provide kind of sporting initiatives for deprived young people in mostly, yeah, well, in London, which is really, really cool. Oh, you were all muted to your very good behaviour, says Ben. It'd be nice if somebody else spoke now instead of me. I'm happy to keep talking, but I feel like I've kind of, you know, talked you out.
I was just wondering whether you might consider, whether you plan to do another row at any point.
No way. No, you know what? No, well, the thing is, there's two reasons why there's a no. The first one is, been there, done that, got the very sweaty t-shirt. And second, because there's somebody told me, you may not have heard this old adage, but happy people don't climb mountains. Mm-hmm. And that really resonated with me. I had so much to prove to myself and to other people. That was the driving force for taking on these challenges. And when you speak to people who have taken on massive challenges like these, if you really hone down to it, it's the same thing. It's about proving oneself. It's that rite of passage. And once you've been through it and done it, I've got nothing to prove in that anymore. Mm-hmm. So much as I would love to just jump in a boat and swan off, it just isn't that time. For me anyway. Yeah, good question though. Anything else from anybody else?
What is your apart from charity, are you still working for BBC, or are you still?
Yeah, so I did quite a bit of work for them actually over time. So I used to work, like I said, as a producer. They call them broadcast assistants now, but it was a production role for local radio. And then over the years, I've done some work with them from our own correspondent on Radio 4. So I kind of, on my adventures and journeys, found stories out there, wrote them up and pitched them to that particular programme, and they've taken me on a few times to do stuff, which is really cool. And actually I miss doing that very much. And also Forethought, if anybody's listened to Forethought. In fact, the Forethought talk was on Hope. So that's still online, I think. So if you want to listen to that talk, I was very, very nervous for that talk. It was really proper scary. Yeah, so it's online if you want to hear it. Oh, Peter, are you speaking? We can't hear you.
Everyone seems to be unmuted, except there are reports of people not being unmuted.
Yeah, it's a funny old tech system. It's a bit kind of hit and miss, isn't it?
If you're on
I think we're unmuted. I think we are unmuted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Shona, aka Dina. We can't hear her, and she's definitely unmuted. And we can't hear Peter either. But if you want to type into a question into the text box, I'm happy to answer it for you.
I'd like to bring Greta in to tell us about her experiences crossing the Atlantic in a boat.
Oh, yeah, do it. Go. I'll sit back and enjoy. Go.
Oh, Greta's muted. That was a bad idea.
Oh no, she can't speak either. It's not funny. I wonder why that's not working.
Greta, in the bottom left of your screen, once you move your mouse, the bottom left-hand corner, we might say unmute.
There's still lots of people with technology situation.
Yeah, it won't allow you. The host is not allowing participants to unmute themselves. Oh, host.
I wanted to ask, whilst they sort this out, what was your perception of time whilst on the boat?
Oh yes, really, really, really interesting. In that the days seem to take years and the months seem to pass like minutes. And so we had we used to do the 5-bar gate. I don't know if you've seen 5-bar gates where you do line, 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 line across. We would write those up like a prisoner on the wall on the inside of our, we felt like a prisoner on the inside of our cabin. But when you have to write up your logbook every day. So I did that every day. But in the end, I didn't end up putting our marks on the chart for a week. Because when you're doing it every single day, your mark is so teeny, tiny, that it was demoralising. So in the end, we ended up waiting a week, and the line was much bigger, so it felt like we got much further. And I think that's how it will probably feel at the end of lockdown as well. Give it a year, and this whole period will feel like every day took so long. And in the end, it will probably only be 4 months total, maybe longer than that if you have a second wave or whatever. But in a year's time, we'll look back and think, God, that minute flashed, didn't it? It's the weirdest thing. It's so odd. And you know, we've had COVID in our house, and my husband was very, very sick, but he didn't end up going into hospital. And before that, we were really, really enjoying the time because the weather was nice, it was novelty, it was fun, it was interesting. You know, Floss was kind of like enjoying being with us all the time. As soon as we all got poorly and came out the other side, our mental health all kind of dropped through the floor, really. And you know, now we're really feeling it, and I think lots of people are really feeling it at the moment. We're kind of like 2/3 of the way through, and it still feels like it's a long way to go. Yeah, but give it a year and we'll be looking back and it'll be gone like that. Yeah, so trying to make the most of the good days and just be at peace with the bad days. And that's the only thing we can do. But actually, it's one of the major benefits of working with the NISAD team is that I have psychotherapists on call. I work with them. I could just call them and say, I'm having a really bad day. And you know, the big piece from them is that just accept the feelings that you're having. And I wish that I had that advice before I did the row, because I battled against it. I was so upset that I wasn't enjoying it. But I'd spent a year and a half preparing it and I wasn't enjoying it. And they say, just accept how you're feeling, be in that feeling and know that it won't last.
Greta is now unmuted and will tell us about her experience crossing the Atlantic.
Go, Greta!
No, Ben is referring to one of the cruises we did together, actually. We crossed it about a year and a half ago from Southampton to Bermuda. And we just got really, really unlucky with the weather, apparently. It was rocking the whole way through. We didn't stop for, I think, 7-8 days. And I mean, for someone who isn't very experienced being on the sea, and this is a big ship, so we shouldn't complain, but we felt nauseous. Really sick. We had to play 3 concerts in these days, and Ben was struggling to keep his balance. And it was a challenge. At some point I look at Google Maps and I realized that I had Europe here and North America here, and we were somewhere right in the middle, and I started to miss my mom. Then again, it's really not as severe as what you've been telling us.
No, but do you know what this is? It's always interesting because you kind of like compare. It's not a competition. Don't compete, don't compare. You know, just because we had a very small boat and it was awful. You know, the feeling of nausea and hideousness and wanting to die, which is really the last phase of seasickness. You think you're going to die and then you want to die. You know, is the same whether you're on a cruise ship or in a rowing boat. We felt exactly the same way. And in fact, you know, I've been when I went on my first cruise, we came out of Gibraltar and I felt exactly the same way. And I was actually really worried that I was going to vomit on stage. So, you know, it's seasickness is the same, big or small. It's horrible. I really feel for you. Really. And what's worse, I think, on a cruise ship is that, you know, there's lots of people wandering around going, oh, this is lovely, isn't it? Oh, it wasn't as bad as the cruise that we went on 10 years ago where, you know, all the stuff was sliding off the tables and you're thinking, why do I feel bad?
Did you get used to the sick? Because when I first got on board, everyone seemed fine apart from me. And
yeah, you get used to it, but you have to pay your dues, unfortunately. It takes a long time. And if you don't want it to take a long time, you have to take the tablets. There's no getting around it. And anybody who tells you to stand and look at the horizon, you need to punch them in the face. It does not work. You say, thank you very much for your advice. I'm just going to go take the tablets. Yeah.
Well, our cabin on that cruise ship, I don't think was much more comfortable than the one you were in on your rowing boat. It was a converted broom cupboard and took the staff 2 hours to find for us when we embarked on the ship. And it was right at the very front, and we had 2 weeks of every few seconds a crash.
Yeah.
That sounds horrific.
Yeah, it wasn't.
Yeah. Cool. I've got 10 minutes before I have to go to my next kind of call, but if anybody has any more questions, I'm really happy to answer them for the next 10 minutes, unless you want to go. Are we all questioned out? Yeah.
Sorry, I'm going to ask something else.
Yeah,
it might be a bit dark, but did you ever have thoughts of what if I never get to land again? Or what if I don't make it? What if I never see my family again? Or what if this is the end?
Yeah, no, it's not. It's, absolutely, I'll be honest and say I didn't feel that, and I'll tell you why I didn't feel that is because it's a very interesting situation when you're at sea, but also in different circumstances, is that you are always fighting for your own survival. When it's really bad, you are always having to do something to make it sure you're safe. If anybody's lost, has anybody watched All Is Lost? It's an amazing film. What's your name? Celia. Can you remember who is it Robert Redford?
Yeah.
Robert Redford, right. So if anybody go and watch it, it's a very interesting film because Robert Redford's yacht, he hits a shipping container into the ocean and he holds the boat. And then it's really a fight for survival in that he has to do something to save himself the entire time. So that's when it was at its worst, that is what you're thinking, is what can I do to save myself? And when I was telling you about that night where we'd eaten cheese, for brevity, I kept that as a completely different story on that night. We were hit by extraordinarily bad weather. I mean, really, really bad. And we could hear the huge waves hitting us from the side. And we actually lay there thinking we were going to go over and that would be it. We have what's called an EPIRB, which is a positioning beacon, an emergency positioning beacon, which you have to set off if you need to be rescued in dire straits. And the problem was we had that beacon out on deck at the other end of the boat, right? So again, as the skipper, I sent Claire out to go and get it in these huge waves. The boat was at 45-degree angle, and she went out to try and get it out of the bracket, and she couldn't get it out, and she came back and she was weeping. I was like, oh my God, why come on then, come in. So I ended up going out. In fact, she joined me, and remember the axe I was telling you about? We had to use the axe to get it out of the bracket. So this is what I'm saying about constantly being in a position where you're constantly having to work for your life. That's what it's like.
Yeah, you're too busy fighting for your life. You don't have time to...
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and in fact, what happens is when you are not fighting for your life, when you're not really in a dire situation, is when you start having dark thoughts. That's the difference. You don't think, it's not when you're thinking that I'm going to die right now. It's when you've come through it and you think, oh God, I could have died then.
Yeah.
Or what if I could die? And the what if is actually the question that we were facing with my husband. And I suspect lots of people are thinking, what if he goes into hospital? What if this is the last time I see him? What if my daughter has to live without him? And they're the difficult ones, because it's the uncertainty, not the actuality.
Yeah.
And that actually is something to kind of almost take heart from, is that, the what if questions are not real, because it isn't real at that time. And when it is real, you will do everything you need to do to get through it. It's the worry of something happening that's worse than the actuality in lots of ways.
That's true.
Yeah. And it was an interesting time for Clint and I, because my husband and I, because we sat and we talked about, because he's an ocean row as well, we had the conversations, if you do go in, what do we do? Where are your bank accounts? What will we do about a will? Should we update that now? Do we need to tell the kids? We had all those conversations.
That's horrible.
It's horrible, but important.
Yeah,
because
of course.
for many people, they don't have that opportunity, and then their loved one goes into hospital, and maybe the worst happens and they die, and then you're faced with those without having thought about them beforehand.
Is your husband healthy now?
Yeah, he's much better than he was. He's still struggling a little bit. It's been over a month and a half. But actually, that's the one benefit of going to sea, is that it sounds like a risky business, but you do everything to mitigate against that risk. So you do all the preparation. You go with all the tools necessary to be able to survive it. Get all the qualifications, so that when you're out there, you have the toolkit to be able to survive it. And that's super important. That actually, we sound like we're risk takers, we're adrenaline junkies. We're not. We are very risk averse, and that's why we're able to get across and survive these things. Yeah. Food for thought.
Oh yeah.
Is that useful? And if anybody wants to email me, by the way, afterwards, please do. It's sally@sallykettle.com. Really easy. Sally@sallykettle.com. Just get in touch. I'd love to speak to you offline. I'm happy to have chats. But I should come to your club at some point in the future. Yes? Oh yes, Sheila says yes. Yay, yay, says Sheila. You'll have to make me lunch.
You must attend one of our lunches, certainly.
Yes, definitely. I'm always up for lunch. Brilliant. So is it okay if I let you go? And
yes, it is.
Thank you very much.
Fascinating. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Brilliant. Well, I'll go, and then you can all talk to each other about me behind my back.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We ought to clap you.
No
Can you
worries.
hear us?
Bye.